the author of the 5-star boxing autobiography, $30 in a cut eye, 50 years of boxing. Let's bring in Philadelphia boxing royalty himself, Russell Peltz. All right, Russ. Let's see. We tried this before, folks. I'm going to give you a little behind the scenes look here. Tried it before. Had a little problems. Hopefully everything goes well because I really want to get this interview in. And it's a pleasure being able to interview one of the greatest promoters of all time, really. So anyway, Russ, let's start let's start all over again. And again, you said before you're 22 years old. You love boxing, and you decided to promote, and you promoted a fight at a smaller venue in Philadelphia. What was the name of that place, Russ?
The Blue Horizon, now known as the legendary Blue Horizon.
Well, there you go, the Blue Horizon. And your first fight, from what I read, that you promoted was Benny Briscoe versus Tito Marshall. I hope I'm right with that. And this being your first fight, how did it feel just before you promoted the fight? I mean, anxious, nervous, and how did it feel after the fight was over?
Well, you're always nervous before the fight, but boxing there hadn't been a fight in Philadelphia since the middle of May. This was September 30th. I was getting a lot of publicity because I was 22 years old and only out of college 1 year. And but it was a rematch of a fight that Briscoe had lost to Tito Marshall 4 years earlier. So everything just fell into line. And, it's still the official record for the most people ever to watch a fight at the Blue Horizon, 1606. But, we can talk about it. Numbers are crazy. Believe me, we've had more people in there than that. The seating capacity was 1346. And I made around, so this is 1969. I made around $1,300 or $1,400 that night, which was a lot of money. Ticket prices were $3 and $5.
That's awesome. Now I know Benny Briscoe was promoted by you for years. What kind of fighter or boxer was Benny Briscoe, Russell?
He was not a boxer. He came to fight. He enjoyed fighting. He didn't take a backward step. He didn't fear anybody. There was never a question, I don't want to fight this guy. I don't want to fight that guy. That never entered into it. And it was a pleasure. And I was spoiled from the beginning because his trainer at the time, Quenzo McCall, when, a few years later, Quenzo he said, everybody isn't going to be like Benny Briscoe. He said, just remember that. He said, you're going to have a lot of problems down the road. And he was not wrong.
So Benny Briscoe and you guys kind of teamed up. You promoted him quite a bit. Let me give you two more names that interested me. One because of the name, and the other one because I know how great a fighter he was. Eugene Cyclone Hart, Russell. Was there anything unique about him, or was he just a hard-nosed fighter, or what made him different than some of the other fighters?
Well, not to be blasphemous and put down Joe Frazier, but Cyclone Hart had the best left hook I ever saw. Wow. Better than Joe Frazier's. Quick, hard, damaging. And that first season, now the seasons back then were September through May, because unless you had a monster fight, you couldn't run in the summer. You needed an air-conditioned arena. So I ran 15 shows in 7.5 months, and Hart fought on 10 of them and knocked out everybody he fought. Wow. So that's a lot of publicity and a lot of knockouts. He knocked out his first 19 opponents, and the 19th being Kitten Hayward, which sold out the 7,000-seat arena in West Philly. So, Philly loves a puncher. Everybody loves a puncher. And here's a guy who was knocking guys out picturesquely with that left hook.
And me, I'm my favorite fighter of all time is Joe Frazier. So I gotta watch this guy. I've got to get a YouTube film or something and check this guy out because Joe Frazier was my childhood, first really fighter I saw a fight against, it was #1 against Muhammad Ali, the fight of the century, and I fell in love with Joe Frazier after that fight. So you know, I gotta watch this guy. I gotta check out Eugene and see how he fought. The second one, Matthew Saad Muhammad, Russell, quite the fighter.
All action. Some of the greatest comeback fights. And I mean, the greatest fight I ever saw in person, as I've said many times, I'm proud to have promoted, which was his first fight with Marvin Johnson at the Spectrum in 1977. I mean, the rematch 2 years later was great, shorter, but this was just like back and forth until Matthew knocked him out in the 12th round, the 12th and last round for the NABF title. Just to, you know, there's certain guys, you know, when the name goes up on the marquee, you're going to see a good fight. And Matthew was one of them, as was Hart, as was Briscoe. I was lucky. I was spoiled. There were a lot of good fighters in Philly in those days, and they weren't babies like today's fighters. They didn't care who they fought.
Yes. I mean, you know, we always seem to get in that discussion. Me and Jack Hirsch, Frank Lotierzo, and other boxing people that love boxing. You know, the way it was then, you just fought, and you fought as much as you could, and it was not you know, fight once every year or every 2 years or fight twice every year. It was this was your livelihood. This is what you did. And they weren't as worried about records as much as fighting the best fights they could. And it seemed like it back in those days, Russell, that's the way boxing was. And that's why I liked, you know, starting watching boxing in the 70s, where, you know, Muhammad Ali wasn't worried about being undefeated. He was worried about beating the next best guy. And that's what I enjoy about boxing the most. And it seems that it's not that way anymore.
No, guys just wanted to fight. Now they want to fight certain guys. Back then they didn't care. Can you get me a fight, Russell? I don't care. I just need a fight. Right.
So I want to get a couple thoughts on, before we talk about you moving to the Philly Spectrum, a couple thoughts on a couple, or at least one heavyweight fighter that was coming up then, and not that, well, 70s, 80s maybe, Tim Witherspoon. East side of Philadelphia, of course. He had the potential. He had, in some fights, he looked like he was unstoppable. But in other fights, he was kind of underwhelming. I mean, do you have any opinion or thoughts on that fighter, on Tim Witherspoon, Russell?
You know, he had his first pro fight for me. I think it was 1979 at the Forum in Upper Darby, which was a converted movie theater. But Witherspoon was probably one of the most mismanaged, mishandled fighters of my generation. If he had the mindset then that he has today, he is a wonderful guy today. Wonderful, entertaining, fun to be around. Back then, he was surly. He was. You couldn't talk to him. Don King had him like in a trance. He was taken advantage of, and he had all the talent in the world. But and a lot of people think he beat Larry Holmes the first time when they fought.
Yeah,
and,
they do.
Then he had some questionable fights, like the one where, in my opinion, he sat down against Bone Crusher Smith in the Garden because Jose Torres, who was the commissioner in New York at the time, did anything Don King told him, and he didn't want to fight another Don King fighter who was a last-minute sub. And then he had a questionable fight I think it was overseas against Brian Nielsen near the end of his career, which didn't make any sense. And I've never spoken to him about that. But and by the way, speaking about crowds at the Blue Horizon, in September of '91, he fought Art Tucker at the Blue Horizon in the main event. Now, I told you we had 1,346 seats, and officially the 1,600 and change for Briscoe Tito Marshall is officially. There were 2,100 people in the building that night. Wow. It's the largest crowd, but you won't read it in the record books because we only recorded 1,385 paid because we didn't want to get in trouble with the fire marshal. But you know those comments where you say it was so packed you couldn't move? You couldn't move. I went upstairs to try and get up to ringside, and me, the promoter, I couldn't get there. You couldn't move in the Blue Horizon.
Wow.
If we'd had a problem that night, I'd have been out of business.
Wow, that's awesome. So you go from the Blue Horizon, you take over the Philly Spectrum. At the time, you were it was the director of boxing there. Russ, am I saying it right? You were the director of boxing for the matches
right,
there?
But first I went to the arena in West Philly, which sat 7,000. I spent 1972 at the arena because the fighters I was developing at the Blue Horizon outgrew the building. So so I went to the arena, and we had a good year, but it dwindled a bit at the end. And then I got a call from the Spectrum because Monday nights were empty nights there, and it cost money just to have the building sitting there. So they'd rather have something in there than nothing. So it was originally called Monday Night Fights at the Spectrum, and we ran, I think, 15 or 16 shows in 1973. And we weren't doing bad until the fall, when Monday Night Football came on, and that really hurt us. Not that the fights that I made that fall were that great, but we hit a low spot from September through December, and the program was in trouble.
I got you. And at the Spectrum, I mean, I know there were unbelievable fighters that participated there: Roberto Duran, Michael Spinks, Marvelous Marvin Hagler, just to name a few. And I know in the Spectrum, it had to be exciting to. I mean, I know you promote these guys or promote the fights, but I imagine you're there and watching some of the greatest boxers ever to throw it down inside the Spectrum.
Well, from 74 through 78, we were up there with the Garden, the Olympic in LA, and the Forum in Inglewood. Those were the top four sites, and we were averaging, I don't know, 7, 8, 9, 10,000. And we switched off Monday nights on my suggestion, and Duran, Michael Spinks, Emil Griffith, Ernie Shavers, naturally the local guys like Benny Briscoe, Cyclone Hart, Willie Monroe, Boogaloo Watts, and then Tyrone Everett came up. And at the very end, there was Jeff Chandler. And Saad Muhammad fought Yaki Lopez there. He fought Marvin Johnson. He fought Richie Cates. I mean, these are classic fights. And, of course, Hagler fought for me 5 times and lost twice. So Bobby Chacon had his only major East Coast fight was at the Spectrum in 1978. I'm proud of that. And we were having fun.
Now, you brought up Marvin Johnson, Russell. This was a fighter that you were involved with a lot. I mean, you helped guide him to the title. What kind of relationship did you have with Marvin Johnson?
Wonderful. He was he's from Indianapolis. He was, he would have been out of place in the North Philadelphia ghetto. He had that Indiana drawl, that slow talking drawl, DRAWL, and he was very innocent and naive, and he was going nowhere. After Briscoe knocked out Cyclone Hart in April of '76 in their rematch, I took a trip across country to recruit talent, and the first real city I stopped in was Indianapolis. And Marvin was fighting there, and I went to the weigh-in. They had it in a restaurant the night before the fight, and Marvin was fighting a guy named Marvin was 12-0. He was fighting a guy named Harold Carter, who was maybe he had 15 wins and 20 losses, and Harold Carter came in like 5 pounds overweight. And Marvin and his brain trust at the time were deciding whether to fight or pull out. And I went up to Champ Chaney, his trainer. He didn't know me. I said, "Hey, Champ, Marvin could beat this guy in his street clothes. Doesn't matter what he weighs." Anyway, Marvin won the fight, and my good friend Fred Burns, who was the promoter out there, he hooked me and Marvin up, and my my brother-in-law became Marvin's manager because I didn't know anything about promotional contracts in those days, and you had to protect yourself somehow. And that's the way we did it back then. You had to have somebody in as the manager that you knew would never screw you.
Yeah.
And so Arnold Weiss became his manager, and I promoted the rest of his career. And it was another guy. He wins the title in Italy, and he could fight anybody in his first defense, and he wants to fight Saad Muhammad again. I mean, this is the mindset.
Yes.
Know? And I asked him when I was writing the book, he said he wanted to prove that he could beat everybody I put in front of him. He said the only way to be the best is to fight the best.
Sure.
I mean, what a mindset when you compare it to what's going on today, when it's all about money. And even then, sometimes it doesn't work.
You're 100% right, Russell. And you know, and talking about today, and I get in some debates with people about, you know, who should be fighting who. And of course, there's a lot more. I mean, there's so many different councils and belts, and it's changed so much. Right now, you have a maybe the second best welterweight in the world fighting out of Philadelphia, maybe the best, Boots Ennis. And Boots Ennis is undefeated right now, and Terrence Crawford is the number one ranked welterweight right now in the world. And they're not, for some reason, there's a problem getting these two together. Now, I don't think this is what happened in the past. I think this would be a major fight. It may not get all the glitter and whatnot, but if it's a great fight, there would be another fight. In fact, I think in the contract, you're going to have a rematch clause in there. Why is there not a call for these two undefeated and perhaps two of the best welterweights or the two best welterweights in the world? Why isn't this being arranged? And what do you think about Boots Ennis, Russell?
No, it's not being arranged because Crawford allegedly is going after bigger money. If he fights Canelo, I don't know much about the guy he's fighting this weekend. Boots Ennis has been a hot prospect for a long time. And this is not a knock at him, but he hasn't really fought the elite of the division. And I don't even know how elite the division is. What's amazing about the 14,000 people that came to see Boots Ennis fight that guy a couple weeks ago, David something. I'm not insulting the guy, but
I know what you mean.
He drew 14,000 people to the Wells Fargo Center. So it's the sixth largest indoor crowd in Pennsylvania history for a fight. What's amazing about it is the other five, Tyrone Everett against Alfredo Escalera, a monster fight for the world junior lightweight title. Benny Briscoe, Marvin Hagler. Bob Montgomery, Wesley Mozon, lightweight title. Joe Louis, Gus D'Orazio. Those were all monster fights. Forget that D'Orazio was just a guy. It was Joe Louis. Now here's Boots Ennis drawing 14,000 people to see him fight basically an exhibition fight. Right. It's the strength of social media. I mean, imagine how many people would come if you were fighting Terrence Crawford or Emil Griffith or Louis Rodriguez or somebody that we knew could fight back.
Do you think, Russ, it's because they don't want to fight Boots Ennis? Is it the problem that Boots Ennis, you know, is it his manager? Is it or is it that the other fighters just don't want a part of him?
It's the fact that we have four sanctioning bodies. They all have their things. The IBF just stripped Usyk. I mean, it's so out of control. And I've said this 1,000 times. At the end of the baseball season coming up in October, let's just say there's no playoffs. And every division winner walks around saying, I'm the champ. That's what boxing is. Yes. And there are people in our business who know what's going on, but the average guy who goes to a New York Giants game or a Boston Bruins hockey game or Cleveland Indians, they don't know who the heavyweight champion of the world is. And yet when I was going to football games in the 60s, everybody knew it was Sonny Liston or Floyd Patterson. I mean, the boxing community has shrunk, if that's the right word, shrank, whatever, so much that it's our world is just, collapsing.
So
And
I got Russell. I got all your awards rolling across the bottom here. All the different Hall of Fames that you were inducted to. I guess I'm just guessing, and maybe a little precocious of me. I guess the International Boxing Hall of Fame would be the highlight of that, of all the different Hall of Fames you were in. Not putting any other Hall of Fame down. I'm just talking about as far as its standing.
that and maybe the Philadelphia Sports Hall of Fame, because Philadelphia is such a fanatical sports city. To be in the Hall of Fame from Philadelphia, which encompasses all sports, not just boxing, was quite the honor. Unfortunately, the year I was inducted was COVID, so we couldn't have a banquet, which was a bit of a bummer, but that's okay. And
Sure.
yeah, those, I would guess those are two. The Lou Klein Awards at Temple for for journalism, because it's a cerebral award, So
Yes.
I listen. Every Hall of Fame. I went to a couple years ago. I was in Fort Myers, and Steve Canton had the announcement, not the banquet, but the announcement for the Florida Boxing Hall of Fame. Okay, and most of the people who were going to be inducted 5 months later showed up, and some of them broke down crying because they were so emotional and so happy to be honored for the Florida Boxing Hall of Fame. And I remember a few years ago, somebody who was getting inducted in the Pennsylvania Boxing Hall of Fame said, "Oh, with 10 cents, you could buy a cup of coffee." I said, "You can't talk like that. You can't think like that. There's people that this is so important to them." So they were all wonderful honors, really. And you know what? When the West Coast Boxing Hall of Fame gave me the award last year for Book of the Year,
Yes.
that was really wonderful. And I went out there, and Rick Farris runs a great organization, and it was just a wonderful time and a wonderful honor, really.
Well, now let's talk about your book. And I was going to bring up the West Coast and I was going to segue that in there, but you just did it for me. So here's Russell Pelt's book, $30 a cut eye, 50 years of boxing. And Russell, you got to use your achievement award from Temple to write the book, right? So I mean, here you go. You get to use it. You get to use it, and I mean, it's 5-star reviewed. You can get it anywhere. Amazon. I was looking through where you could get this book at, people. So you can get it anywhere. Anywhere there's a bookstore, any major bookstores anyway carries this in stock. Listen, I guess the question I want to ask you, to compile something like this, Russell, it must have been unbelievable work to do. I mean, you're talking 50 years, putting it together, making it make sense, and to be read by people not only in boxing, but maybe some of the people that aren't totally into boxing. I mean, this must have been a heck of a task for you.
Well, I was only able to write it because of COVID. And when I knew we weren't going to promote anymore, it was in March of 20, we'd had my 50th anniversary show the previous October. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had time to do it. But, I have a very good memory, number one, for facts and figures. Number two, I have file cabinets in my office building, and there's an individual file in there for every single fight card I ever promoted. The program, the lineup, the photos, the tickets, the profit and loss statements, every contract ever signed, the people who bought tickets, the phone bills. I'm a collector, and so I had all that access, and I've got scrapbooks that, in the old days when we cut the stories out of the newspapers and boxing got a lot of publicity. And I've got scrapbooks going back to 1969. So
Wow.
it was just
So
a labor of love. But the
yes,
reason
that's
I
what
wrote the book,
Right.
was, well, people have been bugging me, but you get so tired of reading things on social media that are so untrue. Like for years, people were saying Hagler got robbed twice in Philly. Well, he didn't get robbed twice in Philly. He got robbed the first time with Boogaloo Watts, but the second time he got beat bad by Willie Monroe, and he admitted it in the paper. So you get tired of reading all the lies and the misconceptions on social media. So now I know that there is a half a century history of Philly from 69 to 2019 that is the absolute truth. And if people don't want to believe it, the money made on fights, the money lost on fights, how fights were made, things I did that I'm proud of, and things I did that I'm not proud of, like I stiffed Tommy Hearns out of $1,000 years ago. And when I was writing the book, I had an attack of guilt, and I sent him $1,000.
Wow, that's awesome. That's awesome. Did he thank you for it? I wonder what happened.
But he said Jackie Cowan set up the call, and he said, $1,000 in 1979 is worth a lot more now. I said, but in 1979 you would have had to cut in Emmanuel Stewart and the cut man and this and that. Now you're getting the whole 1,000 yourself. Yeah, we had fun with it.
Awesome. That's awesome. That's awesome. So, what do you? I mean, boxing fans I know are going to read this. The diehard boxing fans I know are going to read this, Russ. How about the novice, the people out there that are interested in boxing but really don't know about it, like you or some of the other people I know? What do you expect for them to get out of it, Russ?
I think it should be a primer for anybody who wants to know anything about boxing, because it's all about the business of boxing. And I think that every manager, every promoter, every booking agent, every trainer should read the book. We're closing in. I hope by next year we'll have sold 2,000, which is very good for a self-published boxing book. I don't have any big organization behind me promoting it or anything like that. It's basically available either from me or for Amazon. It's just it's what to expect if you get into the business. At least at the time when an independent promoter could make a living in boxing. That's not true today. An independent promoter cannot. It's tough to make a living in boxing today if you don't have access to television, and television is controlled by less than a handful of promoters.
Sure.
So if I have a fighter today who wins 20 in a row and he wants to get on television, if I'm his promoter, I got to turn over half his contract to Eddie Hearn, Golden Boy, or Bob Arum. Yes. How awesome. Russell, you can't get me on television. And he's right.
Sure. Yeah, it's true.
Now and then Dimitri Salita has some fights on TV, but,
Yeah, I mean, Russ, I know one other promoter that's very small scale, Joe DeGuardia, out of Star Boxer Promotions, and he has to team up with the other big promoters to get his fighter fights and to get them on TV. So I know exactly what you're talking about. So, but you're from a different generation. You had your success. You have a great book, and people. Russell, can you tell them? I mean, we know it goes through Amazon. What other ways can they get the book, Russ?
I would say just Amazon and through me.
Okay.
Go to my website, peltzboxing.com. I've had trouble getting it into the bookstores like Barnes and Noble. And you know what? Not if Amazon sells a book for me, I get like $7.50. Okay. If Barnes and Noble sells a book, I get like $2.80. So gotcha. I'm not going to fight too hard to get it in Barnes and Noble. Everybody's going to Amazon. The reviews on Amazon, I don't know if you've read the reviews. Tremendous. They're outstanding.
Yes, they are.
I've had one negative review out of over 100 on Amazon. And you know what it was? The guy took a picture of the book because the cover came bent in the mail. so he only gave it 2 stars. That really shouldn't count.
so
That's
it
the only
wasn't.
negative review.
I believe it. I believe. I thought maybe Don King sent you a bad review. I'm not sure. Anyway, Russ. Listen, folks. Check this book out. It's great. Russ, repeat your website again slowly.
Peltsboxing.com.
Peltsboxing.com, or of course at Amazon. And Russ, I want to thank you for coming in. It's always been a pleasure talking to you. Finally really got to interview you, talk to you a little bit about the Philadelphia boxing at one time was tremendous, and hopefully it makes a little bit of a comeback. Maybe Boots and a couple of people can get together. I know there's a couple of young fighters out there that are interesting. Hopefully it comes back to somewhat what it was before. And again, pleasure having you on, Russell. Thanks a lot for stopping in. Of course, when we have a boxing show or something, we'll reach out to you in the future about something.
Sure. Say hello to Jack for me. It's always a pleasure, Mac.
I definitely